So I am thinking about how to prepare for Bloomsday, celebrated in Pittsburgh this year. Bloomsday, June 16th, the date that James Joyce set his novel Ulysses. The route that the characters take is a pilgrimage, a peregrination, psychogeographic. Commemorating Bloomsday outside of Dublin can mean scheduling readings of the novel in locations that are similar to the locations described in Ulysses, whether that means finding a cemetery or a pub or I guess a brothel. I have thought instead that the actual distance and direction and heading between the areas, between the locations, could be mapped out into a shape like a mandala and then scaled, and then that mandala can be picked up and placed on a different starting point in a different city, for example, my hometown of Pittsburgh. Once I've got the map marked out, then over the course of the next month or two, I will explore the locations that are determined by the shape of the map, right? If the heading is 2 kilometers southwest, then from my house I will walk 2 kilometers southwest. And then if the next step is up, I'll go up a mile or two and then over. I will map out the exact procedural steps. Rather than looking for specific locations, I will map out the directions. This is a map in Google Earth where I've taken the locations of Leopold Bloom's path through Dublin during Ulysses and marked it out in here. So I used Patrick Hastings, the guide to James Joyce's Ulysses. I used his maps. So remember what I'm going to do with this. The reason I'm using Google Earth is that for each of these locations, I'm going to get the coordinates, and then I'm going to figure out the heading and distance between each of these spots. And I'm going to then take that and transpose the starting point from 7 Eccles Street in Dublin to my house here in Pittsburgh. And then I will have a recreation of the path that Leopold Bloom took through Dublin during Ulysses, and then I'm going to walk it. So I was talking yesterday on the train. The idea isn't so much to find locations that are similar, like I'm not going to find a pub or a hospital or a post office. What I want to do is find here in Pittsburgh what happens to be at the location of that coordinate, and then map it out so it's almost like an abstract pattern laid over the city. This, I think, lines up with, when Joyce talks about a new Bloomusalem, or when Bloom talks about a new Bloomusalem, he's referencing Blake and Blake's sort of mystical vision of Jerusalem imposed on London. I think you can read Ulysses in that way as well. One of the many ways you can read Ulysses is that he's marking out a spiritual pilgrimage through Dublin that is equivalent to what Blake is doing with Jerusalem and London. And so I'm going to take that and bring it over here to Pittsburgh. So let me just walk through what I've got. You can see in some cases I've marked out a specific route where there was a route clearly indicated. I put that in here. I didn't put every location in here, but there were a few things that I wanted to highlight. So let's start in. Here's Eccles Street, which of course is where it all starts. And then from Eccles Street early in the morning, He went to the butcher's, which I put here, down and around the corner. These blue lines represent the later walking. This one here actually is my abbreviation of the funeral procession for Paddy Dignam. And this is his return home with Stephen Dedalus. But we'll get to those later. So then he jumps over to the Lotus Eater, and this is where I first started to change my approach, right? So what I've done here is draw the path that's described from, it's not clear to me how he gets here, presumably from Eccles Street he wanders, but that will be accounted for by the distance and heading of the points. But here I'll get to this point here, which is on Lime Street, and then he walks down and over, and then to the post office, where he picks up his letter from Martha, and then the chemist, where he buys the soap, and then over here is the bath. So my first pathway will be from how far and in what direction from Eccles Street to this intersection of Lime Street and the quay on Liffey. And I will map that on Pittsburgh and walk down there, and then I'll follow this path over and see where I end up in the bathhouse. Right, here's the chemist. Here's the Turkish bath. So then, after the bath, he walks over to Paddy Dignam's house on, is it New Haven Road? And then there's a funeral procession all the way out to the cemetery. And I'm going to have to think what to do here, because he didn't walk that. He was in a carriage. And it's quite a long way. It's an extra 4 or 5 miles. And you can see it actually goes right past Eccles Street. I need to clean this line up a little bit. I didn't put enough points in, so it should actually go around the curve here. Instead, the line goes straight. So maybe what I'll do is see if there's a bus route that's equivalent. Or it may be that Dignam's house to the cemetery for the Hades chapter is a separate walk that I do, just that deliberate intersection. You see, it basically goes parallax, which is a word that frequently occurs in the book, through the rest of the action. The only other item that's further away for Leopold is Miss Gertie over here on Sandy Mount Strand. Of course, Stephen, who's not represented on here, Stephen starts out here in Sandy Mount and then moves his way into town. I'll do this a separate map for Stephen, but for this year, my focus is Leopold. So there's the cemetery. And then they all get back into town. Leopold doesn't stop for drinks, although Simon Dedalus and the crew do. He goes to the Freeman's Journal office, which I've placed around here, based on, again, the map. It's in here. I don't put in some of the ins and outs associated with that. But then from the Freeman's Journal offices over to Davy Burns' pub, which over here, because remember, Bloom is walking. He wants to go to the National Museum. He wants to do it for 2 reasons. He wants to look up a previous ad to use as a reference, but he also wants to check and see if the Greek statues have buttholes. And on the way then, he stops in at Davy Burns' pub, has a glass of glass of Bordeaux, and a gorgonzola cheese sandwich. And then Dublin National Library. He is there on the periphery during the Scylla and Charybdis chapter where Stephen is also at the Dublin National Library. They cross paths very, very briefly, both on the way out. Buck Mulligan makes some disparaging jokes about Leopold Bloom, but they don't actually speak or cross paths there. But this chapter in the library is very much about Stephen and his Hamlet. Then the Wandering Rocks chapter, which is a sort of magnificent collage of activity, maybe 20, 30 different people, different locations intersecting through here. You could do an entire map and an entire sequence just on the Wandering Rocks chapter, which I may do for another year. This year, Bloom buys a book and on Dame Street. Here he buys the Sweets of Sin. It's a sort of smutty romance that he's buying for his wife, Molly. He picks that up. Stephen is wandering around here at the same time, but again, they don't meet. Then he goes over to the Ormond over here for dinner. The Sirens is a very musical chapter. Simon Dedalus, Stephen's father, is singing. It's a beautiful chapter. But at this point, we're getting to the timeline where Blazes Boylan is scheduled to be over at Eccles Street, preparatory to his seduction of Molly, the affair that they have arranged. The reason why Bloom is out most of the day, to avoid being there. After dinner, then, and in fact, Blazes Boylan is another character with a few key locations. This being one of them. He actually swings in for a quick shot of whiskey before going off to meet Molly. Barney Kiernan's pub for the Cyclops chapter. It's quite a walk, right? But Bloom's up there because he wants to meet up with, I forget who it is Martin Cunningham, someone to talk to about the insurance policy for Patty Dignam's widow. Then he gets out of there, over to Dignam's house. It's a long walk, and I'm not sure, it's unclear to me, he might be in a carriage to get over there. But he goes back to Dignam's house, which is over here, talks to the widow. That's all kind of off stage. We don't really spend a lot of time understanding what's going on there. The next thing we know, it's sunset. Bloom is tired. He walks to the Strand here. He sees Gertie McDowell. She sees him. She reveals her knickers to him from a distance, and he masturbates. This is the chapter that got Ulysses and Joyce in trouble for pornography. Then from there, he wanders back into town and stops at the Hollis Street Maternity Hospital to visit Mrs. Purefoy, who's been in labor for a long time. And Stephen is there drinking it up with the medical students. And it's at this point that the two of them are really now joined. They take the trolley over to the Amiens Street station. It's a ways away. And from there, they wander. Here's a path. They wander from the Amiens Street station through Nighttown, right, the bad part of, or not the bad part, the red light district, up to Bella Cohen's establishment. And this is where the Circe chapter takes place. Stephen ends up getting the shit kicked out of him, and together, Stephen and Bloom walk this route here, get some fresh air, down to the cabman shelter. That's my dog yawning. And then from there, they wander back to Eccles Street. That's this path here. This is a fantastic site. I'm going to share this link with everybody, but here I can put in 2 coordinates and it will give me the distance and bearing between those 2 points. So that will then give me the data, and then down here put a start point, a bearing, and a distance. If I put the start point as my house, you can see I was testing this out, my house, and then I know that I have a bearing and a distance, it'll give me the final point, the destination point, and then that will give me where in Pittsburgh the secondary location will be. Okay, and then of course after the cabman shelter, it's going home. Butcher is here. Okay, see how I'm doing this? Pretty gruesome, pretty groovy, right? Pretty awesome. So, for the post office, I know I'm going to go 1.851 kilometers, and my final bearing is 146. Pittsburgh equivalent for the post office is here, right? See how this is happening? I'll do a few more of these. Pittsburgh. I'm very happy with this. This is Bloomsday, transcribed, transposed, etched onto Pittsburgh, and it's fascinating to look at. So let's take a quick wander through what this will look like, starting at my house. Don't be creepy. That's where I live. And then, of course, the butcher's block just down the road and in someone's backyard. The post office, it's a bit of a jaunt. But so this is Chatham College. So the post office, the chemist, where he buys the soap, and the Turkish bath, where he has a bath. All moving up the hill to Chatham. That'd be nice. That actually is very nice. That should be quite lovely. Then Dignam is Dignam. Dignam is in Shenley. No, Frick. That's Frick Park. So in here's interesting. This is the East Busway. It's a a busway that goes into town. Oh wait, no, that's the train track. No, it's the busway. Yeah, it's the busway. The cemetery that's out in Lawrenceville. Again, that's doable. Right, this is the cemetery. It's on the other side of the. Holy shoot! It is. This is the big cemetery out there, and Glasnevin Cemetery is right on the edge of the cemetery. Interesting. I'm not going to put too much weight on that. Then the Freeman office. We're in Oakland area, which is one of the college areas. Bloomsday, Pittsburgh, Davy Bloom, and the library. That's all, Oakland, Shadyside. Of course, that's where I live, so I wouldn't expect to find that any different. Bloom buys a book. Up here, there's the Ormond. Here's the CMU campus, just to orient people around town. We don't quite get down there for a lot of this. Barney Kiernan's Pub up there. Yeah, that's the Pitt campus, right? Gertie, where's Gertie? She's all the way out over here again. That's going to be a trek. Yeah, that's Point Breeze, Wilkinsburg. I know a couple of people who live out here. Maybe I'll visit them. And the maternity hospital. Here we go. Knock on that person's house, let them know where they are. The Amiens Street Station. It's very, very close to the East Busway. This is all like, here's the liquor store. And this is all like the Bakery Square stuff. I think this is the new Target. So this is all makes sense. Bella Cohen up there again by the busway and then the Cabman's Shelter down here. This all looks very doable. It's going to be quite a nice trek through the east end of Pittsburgh. The only question will be that cemetery, because from the cemetery to Dignam's house, it's like 4 or 5 miles. And that's a bit of a trek on top of everything else. And of course, Bloom was in a cab. But there you go. This is it. Next set of videos will be the walk itself, or the walks. Maybe I'll take a couple of days and tootle around all this. I'll think about the sequence. Naturally, I'm going to follow the sequence of the book as much as possible, with the exception of maybe that long funeral route, which really does, you can see, kind of pass through everything, right from Dignam's house up to the cemetery. If you remember from Dublin, from the Dublin map, it actually crosses very close to Eccles Street. So I might see if I can recreate that path and do that as a separate walk one day. But everything else I'll kind of truck along in order. All right, there you go. How cool is this? Let me know how cool this is, because it's pretty freaking cool.